Tell you what, if you'll keep the table out or let me just put this in the back of your truck for a minute while I go up there.
Here.
Been him, he didn't seem bright enough, but looks could be deceiving. Pangborn had said Ridgwick had ticketed the Cadillac on his orders, but that didn't make it true. And in the men's room, when Ridgwick had called him Buster, there had been a look of knowing, jeering contempt in his eyes. Had Ridgwick been around when the first letters from the Bureau of Taxation began to come in? Keaton was quite sure he had been. Later today, he would look up the man's employment record just to be sure. What about Pangborn himself? He was certainly bright enough. He most certainly hated Danforth Keaton. Didn't they all hate him? And Pangborn knew lots of people in Augusta. He knew them well. Hell, he was on the phone to them every fucking day, it seemed. The phone bills, even with the Watts line, were horrible. Could it be both of them, Pangborn and Ridgwick, in on it together? The Lone Ranger and his faithful Indian companion Tonto, Keaton said in a low voice and smiled balefully. If it was you, Pangborn, you'll be sorry. And if it was both of you, you'll both be sorry. His hands slowly rolled themselves into fists. I won't stand this persecution forever, you know. His carefully manicured nails cut into the flesh of his palms. He did not notice the blood when it began to flow. Maybe Ridgwick, maybe Pangborn, maybe Melissa Clutterbuck, the frigid bitch who was the town treasurer, maybe Bill Fullerton, the second selectman. He knew for a fact that Fullerton wanted his job and wouldn't rest until he had it. Maybe all of them, together. Keaton let out his breath in a long, tortured sigh, making a fog flower on the wire-reinforced glass of his office window. The question was, what was he going to do about it? Between now and the 17th of the month, what was he going to do? The answer was simple. He didn't know. Danforth Keaton's life as a young man had been a thing of clear blacks and whites, and he had liked that just fine. He had gone to Castle Rock High School and began working part-time at the family car dealership when he was 14. washing the demonstrators and waxing the showroom models. Keaton Chevrolet was one of the oldest Chevrolet franchises in New England and keystone of the Keaton financial structure. That had been a solid structure indeed, at least until fairly recently. During his 4 years at Castle Rock High, he had been buster to just about everyone. He took the commercial courses, maintained a solid B average, ran the student council almost single-handed, and went on to Trainer Business College in Boston. He made straight A's at Trainer and graduated 3 semesters early. When he came back to the Rock, he quickly made it clear that his buster days were over. It had been a fine life until the trip he and Steve Frazier had made to Lewiston 9 or 10 years ago. That was when the trouble had started. That was when his neat black and white life began to fill with deepening shades of gray. He had never gambled, not as Buster at CRHS, not as Dan at Trainer Business, not as Mr. Keaton of Keaton Chevrolet and the Board of Selectmen. As far as Keaton knew, no one in his whole family had gambled. He could not remember even such innocent pastimes as nickel scat or pitching pennies. There was no taboo against these things, no thou shalt not, but no one did it. Keaton had not laid down a bet on anything until that first trip to the Lewiston Raceway with Steve Frazier. He had never placed a bet anywhere else, nor did he need to. The raceway was all the ruin Danforth Keaton ever needed. He had been 3rd selectman then. Steve Frazier, now at least 5 years in his grave, had been Castle Rock's head selectman. Keaton and Frazier had gone up the city. Trips to Lewiston were always referred to in this way, along with Butch Netto, the Rock's overseer of county social services, and Harry Samuels, who was still a selectman and would probably go to his grave as one. The occasion had been a statewide conference of county officials. The subject had been the new revenue sharing laws. And it was revenue sharing, of course, that had caused most of his trouble. Without it, Keaton would have been forced to dig his grave with a pick and shovel. With it, he had been able to use a financial bucket loader. It was a 2-day conference. On the evening between, Steve had suggested they go out and have a little fun in the big city. Butch and Harry had declined. Keaton had no interest in spending the evening with Steve Frazier either. He was a fat old blowhard with lard for brains. He had gone, though. He supposed he would have gone if Steve had suggested they spend the evening touring the deepest shit pits of hell. Steve was, after all, the head selectman. Harry Samuels would be content to drone along as 2nd, 3rd, or 4th selectman for the rest of his life. Butch Netto had already indicated that he meant to step down after his current term. But Danforth Keaton had ambitions, and Frazier, fat old blowhard or not, was the key to them. So they had gone out, stopping first at the Holly. "Be jolly at the Holly," read the motto over the door, and Frazier had gotten very jolly indeed, drinking scotch and waters as if the scotch had been left out of them, and whistling at the strippers, who were mostly fat, and mostly old, and always slow. Keaton thought most of them looked stoned. He remembered thinking it was going to be a long evening. Then they had gone to the Lewiston Raceway, and everything changed. They got there in time for the 5th pace, and Frazier had hustled a protesting Keaton over to the betting windows like a sheepdog nipping a wayward lamb back to the herd. "Steve, I don't know anything about this." "That doesn't matter," Frazier replied happily, breathing Scotch fumes into Keaton's face. "We're gonna be lucky tonight, Buster. I can feel it." He hadn't any idea of how to bet, and Frazier's constant chatter had made it hard to listen to what the other bettors in line were saying when they got to the $2 window. When he got there, he pushed a $5 bill across to the teller and said, "Number 4. "Win, place, or show?" the teller asked. But for a moment, Keaton had not been able to reply. Behind the teller, he saw an amazing thing. 3 clerks were counting and banding huge piles of currency, more cash than Keaton had ever seen in one place. "Win, place, or show?" the teller repeated impatiently. "Hurry up, buddy. This is not the public library." "Win," Keaton had said. He hadn't the slightest idea what place and show meant, but win he understood very well. The teller thrust him a ticket and $3 change, a 1 and a 2. Keaton looked at the 2 with curious interest as Frazier placed his bet. He had known there were such things as $2 bills, of course, but he didn't think he'd ever seen one before. Thomas Jefferson was on it. Interesting. In fact, the whole thing was interesting. The smells of the horses, popcorn, peanuts, the hurrying crowds, the atmosphere of urgency. The place was awake in a way he recognized and responded to at once. He had felt this sort of wakefulness in himself before, yes, many times, but it was the first time he had ever sensed it in the wider world. Danforth Buster Keaton, who rarely felt a part of anything, not really, felt he was a part of this, very much a part. "This beats hell out of the Holly," he said as Frazier rejoined him. "Yeah, harness racing's okay," Frazier said. "It won't ever replace the World Series, but you know. Come on, let's get over to the rail. Which horse did you bet on?" Keaton didn't remember. He had to check his ticket. "Number 4, he said. "Place or show?" Win." Frazier shook his head in good-natured contempt and clapped him on the shoulder. "Win's a sucker bet, Buster. It's a sucker bet even when the tote board says it isn't. But you'll learn." And of course, he had. Somewhere a bell went off with a loud brang that made Keaton jump. A voice bellowed, "And they're off!" through the raceway's speakers. A thunderous roar went up from the crowd, and Keaton had felt a sudden spurt of electricity course through his body. Hooves tattooed the dirt track. Frazier grabbed Keaton's elbow with one hand and used the other to make a path through the crowd to the rail. They came out less than 20 yards from the finish line. Now the announcer was calling the race. Number 7, My Lass, leading at the first turn with number 8, Broken Field, second, and number 1, How Do, third. Number 4 was named Absolutely, the dumbest name for a horse Keaton had ever heard in his life, and it was running 6th. He hardly cared. He was transfixed by the pelting horses, their coats gleaming under the floodlights by the blur of wheels as the sulky swept around the turn, the bright colors of the silks worn by the drivers. As the horses entered the backstretch, Broken Field began to press My Lass for the lead. My Lass broke stride and Broken Field flew by her. At the same time, Absolutely began to move up on the outside. Keaton saw it before the disembodied voice of the announcer sent the news blaring across the track, and he barely felt Frazier elbowing him, barely heard him screaming, "That's your hoss, Buster! That's your hoss, and he's got a chance!" As the horses thundered down the final straightaway toward the place where Keaton and Frazier were